Dr. Kruse. What's going on? What's the problem with artificial light?
Well, it destroys every bit of how your cell has been put together by evolution or God, whoever you choose to believe. And you have to understand fundamentally how the wiring diagram inside the cell works. But you need to realize that the wiring diagram is powered by an external source of energy and information called the sun. Everything on this planet, including every speck of food that grows on it, any place in the world, doesn't matter the latitude, longitude you are, is linked to this. Every single animal on this planet, every sentient being is linked to this energy source. And the way they are constructed takes advantage of this wireless communication between the sun and the planet. And the way in which life is organized on this planet creates the variables of how we need to act. And it turns out we were not built to act with an alien sun that was created by transhumanist technologists. And when you realize, I mean, I'm assuming you're a European guy or British guy, you should probably know about the cover of Pink Floyd's album cover. That's iconic, where you see a prism and the light come through it to mimic, you know, what Newton's experiments did on light, 500 years ago in England. And the album's Dark Side of the Moon, and you see there's 7 different frequencies. And it turns out that's not how we experience light. So the light of the transhumanist globalists is blue light. Why? Because blue light does 2 things fundamentally to our system. It dumbs us down by altering 2 key chemicals that react to light, which is dopamine and melatonin. Now, melatonin is actually tied much more to the change programs that alter the engines in our body. In other words, most people look at our life force as the thing that drives us, in our life. So the way I like to describe it to, simple-minded people who are not scientists, think about a Ferrari coming off the line in Italy. That car goes 225 miles an hour, even if you put shit on a shingle, inside the fuel tank. And if you want to keep it going 225 miles an hour, you actually have to clean the carburetor, you have to clean, the jet injection, all those things. The mechanic is outside the system. In us, the mechanic is inside the system. And it's through a process called autophagy and apoptosis that those mechanics make sure that our engines are in really good shape. Turns out that those 2 mechanics inside us are also taken care of by 2 frequencies of that Pink Floyd album cover, purple and red. And when you understand that purple and red act in unison to help us carry our water through life, you begin to realize that blue light is a real problem, and it's been picked by design to be in every screen, every device, because it's much easier to govern people in centralized systems who are blue light irradiated and have no idea that it's happening to them. And this light scopes our beliefs, it scopes our behavior, it scopes the life we get, and it does it below our perception to realize truly what's happening. This is the reason why you never see any computer screens, any phones, anything like that come with default settings that have either purple or red light associated with them. Because if you did that, then you would actually not be addicted to the technology that Apple, Microsoft, Google, Meta, all have created. And the most valuable asset that a living creature has is time. It's not anything else. And when you're addicted to blue light technologies, they are actually stealing your time. And this is the reason why DARPA transferred patents to Google and to Meta, and they hold those patents to this very day. And those patents are used in just about every tech gear that's out there. So when you know this, what's your plan? Your plan should be to do what I'm doing. You sit at your house or you build a house that has no walls, that is out towards the AM sun. And you spend your time in there because that's where the purple and the red light is, and there's not as much blue light. Why? Because I seek people who want sovereignty, both in medicine, in money, their freedoms, life, liberty, and so that we can pursue happiness in a way that we're not encumbered by the state. I think that would be my answer.
Thank you. And I'm really curious to know, but by the way, thank you for that. That's really, really interesting, especially the DARPA stuff, because I've gone down that route. I don't want to really get into that today because that's like a whole other conversation. But I'm just curious to know with you, like the light blocking glasses that you can buy everywhere now. They have like an orange filter in or a red filter. I guess my question, just to zoom out a little bit, is this artificial light, when it's hitting us, is it the danger as it's getting in our eyes or skin, all of the above? Could you just break down, like, can we protect ourselves with the glasses, or does it go much deeper than that?
Yeah, the glasses only protect your eyes. You have to remember the two ways that we get energy and information in this wireless connection I told you is actually through our skin and our eyes. Up until 2009, really, the stuff that I was teaching people was really about the eyes, and that's why the glasses were a really big deal. But after 2009, 2014, but really 2017 is when the game changed. We found out that the blue light detector that's present in all of living things, but especially us, is now in our skin, our fat, sub-Q fat, in our arteries. It's the number one blue light detector in the human brain. That's when the game changed. That's when you're around artificial light, you need to protect all your body. And unfortunately, blue light actually has the capability of penetrating through some of your skin. Now, the glasses that you talked about, remember, all the glasses are what I would like to say heterogeneous. They don't block all blue light equivalent. So I tell my people I want their blue blockers to block from 400 to 550 nanometer light. Why? Because blue light, effectively, what does it do? You know, to answer your first question, I told you melatonin is a big thing because that's what recycles our engines. Well, blue light destroys melatonin production in mitochondria. So that means that's the agent of destruction. So obviously you want to put it over your eyes, but then it raises the question, because of the new data, we want to also do it on our skin and everywhere else, because if you don't, wherever the light interacts with you is actually going to reduce melatonin in that part of your body. That's the shocking revelation of this science from 2009, 2014, and really the paper from 2017 really hammers the point home. And when you consider from, I would say, probably 1995, when all this data was transferred from DARPA to Google and Meta, you begin to realize that we've created, a 25-year history in humans where we're being irradiated by an alien sun. And not only that, the other big issue, to get back to the Pink Floyd album cover, technology also has another fundamental change in our behavior that I think people don't realize. It brings us from outside in. You're actually subtracting yourself from nature, and anything that does that is actually an enemy of we the people. And the problem is we're acting like Plato's allegory of the cave and helping them because we're all addicted to it, but realize the addiction is part of the whole blue light story, because that lowers dopamine, and anything that lowers dopamine makes you more likely to obey. And when you see all these parts, I mean, it's a beautiful design. And, in my country, we had Obama ban the incandescent when he was president in 2009 and then phase it out. Biden just signed papers that the incandescent from the United States effectively be stopped in like 2026, 2028. And this is a huge problem. The thing is, that's maybe good for, energy efficiency. Like if you're a climate believer, you may think that's ultimately a good thing. But when you realize that the choice between incandescents and the newer lights is it subtracts out purple and red.
Hey, just pausing the podcast for 2 quick seconds to let you know about Breathwork in a blink. This is our Friday newsletter where I'm sharing with you all my top tricks and hacks, free breathing exercises that you can practice, studies that I've been reading, and it's all been designed that you can read it in under 5 minutes. So it's really low key and easy to digest, but gives you an immense amount of value. Over 10,000 people are following this newsletter now, so you can click the link below. It's completely free to get set up, and I'll share with you every Friday these top tricks and hacks so you too can improve your own breathing. So click on the link below and let's get back on with the podcast. Cheers. So what I'm curious to know, Jack, is when the sun goes down, what does your life look like in your house? Do you have light bulbs? Are you candlelight? What are you doing when the sun goes down?
All the light in here is red.
You got special light bulbs?
We tend to use candles or infrared A light.
Yep.
But generally in El Salvador, since we have light stability, every day it gets dark here at 6:30. It doesn't matter the season.
Yep.
So usually we're in bed by 8:30.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Now, in your case, where you are in London now, in July, it sometimes will stay light out to 11, 12 o'clock at night, depending on what latitude, you are in the UK or in Scandinavia.
Yep.
I mean, last summer, I was in Norway, northern Norway, and I did a podcast. And the podcast was, while the sun was out, it was midnight, which was crazy.
Yeah.
But, it made the point that light stability is a huge problem the further you get away, from the equator. And I look at the light stability issue as a microcosm of the tech problem.
Yes.
That's actually what technology does too, because it creates a light instability problem. Different mechanism, but ultimately the effect on disease transmission quite high because of the way we're built. And for someone who's a high latitude liver, what do they need to do? What's the key take home? They need to see the sunrise every single day. And then I think they need to embrace cold, and they need to really embrace cold. Like if I lived where I just came back from in Europe, I would not own a down jacket.
No.
Maybe the only thing I would own is a sweater.
Yeah.
And I would not wear anything more than that. You have to be fully embraced, like hats, scarves, probably not. You might need them if you go to, Stonehenge and it's blowing, 60 miles an hour and things like that.
Sure.
But you probably don't want to go to Stonehenge in the wintertime in the UK either. Probably a smarter move, to go at different times of the year. But I know everybody wants to get that picture on, on December 20th with the light coming through. But, there's ways to do it. And you have to realize, since everybody is using technology, that means you have to be more correct in how you're using the sun and cold than not.
Yes.
And if you don't, then you're going to wind up in the NHS.
Yeah, for sure. So the sun sets here around 9 p.m., something like that right now, give or take. And I'd love to get your thoughts on the answer to this. So let's just say I'm sitting in a dark room in the house. It's like 8:30, 8:45, and I'm getting ready for bed. Would I be better off staying in a dark environment and then going to sleep? Or would I be better off going outside and getting the sunset on my skin and eyes and then going to sleep? Or would that wake me up? What's your thoughts on that?
The sunset, if you lose the light at 9, the sunset for you is probably going to be earlier than that. So I would tell you, when the sun sets, that's when our lights would go off. And the reason why is because you don't have light stability, and light is so crazy. The reason I would turn everything off if I lived at a high latitude, because I know the abuse that you're getting during the day, which is no sun and too much tech, it means that you need to run a tighter ship at night. And no, I probably wouldn't use red light. And if I lived in the UK, I would probably use candles. That's all I would use. Why? Because it disrupts melatonin the least. That would create probably an issue for your family until they adapted to it. But here's the good thing. Most people really like candles because it gives you a good ambiance. The only bad thing about candles is when you use them, as I do, it gets pretty expensive. And down here in El Salvador, I got to be honest with you, candles are not an easy thing to find. It's not like when we're back in the States, we can find them everywhere. But down here, they're not very, very common. But I will tell you, life here is not very brisk after sunset. It's not like being in New York City. It's not like being in London. Most of the people here, they live better by the light cycle just because it's like brutally dark every day by 6:45. And that limits, the action, that's going on here. But the flip side of that is the sun rises just about every day between, like this time of the year, 5:15 to 5:30. The worst it gets is maybe 6 o'clock in the morning in the wintertime. But I think on December 20th in El Salvador, we only lose like 15 or 16 minutes of sunlight. That's it. And that's the benefit of the 13th latitude. So for us, the light stability creates a groove that we get into, and we go to bed. I mean, last night we made an era. My nurse and I stayed up and we watched a movie on Netflix that she thought would be good, and it was a good movie, but we were still in bed by, I think, 9:30. And like I said, we sleep all the way until the light comes through the blackout curtains, or around the edge. And I've been up for about an hour waiting to do this with you, but completely in the sun with nothing else, on. That's kind of the existence. And the thing is, I'm not willing to give that up because that's actually what optimizes my brain so that I can do the things that I do. And to be honest with you, that's all I care about.
Gotcha. Sunlight on genitals. I've seen a craze of this on TikTok and YouTube. Any science to getting sunlight on those private bits?
Yeah, there is. I mean, what people don't know, and this is the irony for you guys, it's a little bit different in high latitude, but most people don't know that the sex steroid hormones are all made from these things called aromatic amino acids and aromatic rings. What do those things do in chemistry? They absorb light, okay? So what's the off switch for the sex steroid hormones? Turns out it's UV light. So do a hard stop, considering where you live. You get very little UV light, except this time of the year. So if you want to turn them off normally, last time I was in London, I didn't see anybody walking around, that was turning off any of their hormones. And then this is part of the reason why women, have such a high, nasty rate of like triple negative breast cancer. Because remember, when you hear stories about that kind of breast cancer, what do they always tell you? That the sex steroid hormone receptors are on the tumors. Well, why? There's no off switch. Remember, the light acts as a photo off switch. The other flip side of that is this process is called pregnenolone-Steele syndrome, and I don't think your listeners need to know about the science, but pregnenolone-Steele syndrome is the process of stopping sex steroid hormones from going high. What the body does, it shunts it then to cortisol. Cortisol is the AM hormone that actually wakes us up. So when you begin to see some of the light in the sun, which is in the AM is mostly red and blue, that balance of red and blue actually stimulates your cortisol, and the cortisol changes water flows in your brain. That stretches things, and that's how you know, okay, it's time to rise. When you see people and you do hormone studies on them and everything's upside down, what does it tell you as a clinician? It tells you that your patient is light mismatched from the get-go. Like, they can tell you whatever they want, but immediately. The problem, like for the NHS, is when people come in, they never order any of these tests, on them. So there's no way to know. But I can tell you, literally, I will tell you this funny story because it's tied to what you're asking. When we got off the plane, when we went to the Bitcoin Prague meeting a couple of weeks ago, it was probably 4 weeks ago now, I told Chantal, my nurse, that as soon as we get off the plane, I guarantee you within 15 minutes, we would see somebody with MS in the airport. And she's like, there's no way. I said, I promise you. We're landing at, I think it was 54 latitude where we came in. It was in the Netherlands. And on a KLM flight. And I told her that this country has one of the highest spikes for MS, and it's tied to these water flows and upside down things. So we're walking to our next flight, and don't you think she sees somebody, and I looked at her, I said, so tell me how I knew this. And then we saw other people. I said, do you understand that when you come to a different country that has a different zip code because of the latitude, the disease metrics we see. Now, for you and your audience, where I live, this will stun you. I've been here for 3.5 years. I haven't seen one case of MS in this country yet. Not one. So, if you're living in the UK or you're living in the Netherlands, you're living in Scandinavia, and you look to your left and you look to your right, and you know that MS is a much more common disease there, and you want to do something about it, instead of relying on big pharma solutions, don't you think maybe you'd want to try going to a place for a longer period of time than a week and seeing if you could actually, fix your problem without the big pharma solution? And see, that's what decentralized medicine is all about. It's actually about getting that idea in your head. But you know what the problem that Northern Europeans who have MS get? They already have brain damage from the MS. So do you think they think well? The answer is no. So they're like, no, I can't leave my mother. I can't leave my father. I can't leave my family. So what do? They make a decision to institutionalize themselves within the border of a country because they have free health care, instead of actually saying, you know what, I'm going to jump off the cliff with no wings, and I'm going to try to reverse this disease completely. And ultimately, that's why I said, this comes down to the decision tree you make. And what I've tried to explain to you, at least with your first question, is you make better decisions when dopamine and melatonin are optimized. And the only way they get optimized is when you pull out that Pink Floyd album cover and realize you need a lot of purple and a lot of infrared A light. And we're not just talking about you being outside. If you're outside with all your clothes on in Europe, which is what people do in central London, that ain't being outside, my friend. That's how you wind up, like George Michael and dead at 50. Doesn't make any sense. It's also the reason why, even some of the dermatologists now in the UK who, I'm glad to hear they're waking up. A guy named Richard Weller, if you haven't had him on your podcast, you probably should. He practiced in Edinburgh, and he's got YouTube videos that are now 10 years old. And he goes, maybe some of the advice that I've been giving people through the NHS is wrong, that we need people, especially in Scotland, to get sun when the sun is really out, because of the different chemicals that it makes. And one of the big ones that he's interested in is blood pressure for nitric oxide, because it turns out UVA light makes it. And, that improves things. And when a lot of people don't really care too much about blood pressure, so I go to the things that they care about. So with guys that have this problem, I always tell them this is the reason why I use Viagra, because guess what? Nitric oxide is what gives you an erection too. And I said, do you understand now why Viagra is so popular everywhere in the world? Because nobody's got their junk out, which goes to the question you just asked me. I didn't forget it. I just wanted to give you the circle path back so that you understand. And the same thing is true with women. What's the story with women and sex steroid hormones? I generally hate the WHO, but I will give them credit when they do something good. In 2009, you know what the WHO published as the #1 leading cause of breast cancer worldwide? A vitamin D level that's low. So what does that tell you? Vitamin D isn't the be-all, end-all for breast cancer. It just tells you that it's a proxy for how much UV light you get. So if you want to know why breast cancer is much more common further from the equator, you just got the answer. It's right there. And then I would say to you, as a young man in the UK, how many times have you seen titties out in the UK ever? Okay, there's your answer. And the funny thing is we all joke about it. We know, like right now, there's a big soccer tournament that you guys just had in Europe, right? Well, we also had one here in Central America, Copa, and you saw the Colombian girls walking around with their tops off and had no problem. Remember where Colombia is, my friend. 0 degrees latitude. In other words, the people down there don't have a problem taking their clothes off, but it's the Victorian culture, up at high latitudes. Well, no, we don't do that. Just realize that is a problem if you've got breast cancer. And breast cancer in places like Ecuador, Venezuela, it's extremely low.
Fascinating. I want to ask you a quick question on some artificial lights, then we'll move on to grounding and earthing. I'd love to pick your brains on that. But I've got one of these devices called a flex beam, and it has red lights, and you can wrap it around things. There's another device called a Juve. What are your thoughts on some of these artificial panels of, I think, is it near infrared light? Could you just explain, is that a good thing? Should we look into those? I know it doesn't benefit us more than being outside, but is there some benefits to these red light panels?
Well, the question you bring up, it's a good one. You probably won't like my answer, and neither will the audience, but I don't believe that you should ever opt for artificial light when you have the sun available. Now, that being said, understanding that you're a dude from the UK and you guys don't have good sun to begin with, am I okay with people using infrared A or near infrared lights? The answer is yes. Why? Because I think the harm that can come to you from using is small. But here's the thing that you need to realize. Not all those red lights are created equal. So, for example, the one you mentioned, Juve, I would never let any of my patients use it. Why? Because it's got huge flicker effects in it. And the way in which they tell you to use it, in my opinion, is incorrect. It's not based on the laws of physics that are known around infrared light. And it turns out with infrared light, we do better with smaller intensity for shorter periods of time because of some of the physics in that light. And the thing is, if you get told the wrong thing by a manufacturer, remember what the goal is of the manufacturers, to sell it just like, Google and Meta through their platforms. And I tell all my members this, and I say it on every podcast, that marketing is legalized lying. So that means you as a decentralized person needs to ask the questions, okay, A, is this light decent? And is it going to harm me? And am I being told how to use it the right way? So that means you're relying on the person who makes the light to give you that information. That is absolutely the wrong thing to do. In fact, you need to really rely on somebody else who knows what they're doing and see what their recommendations are. And if you, go to my Instagram or my X account, you'll see what I always post. I said the sun is Tina, and everybody asks me, what's Tina? There is no alternative, okay? So even in the UK, I am going to try to convince you, your wife, and your new little baby, when the sun is out, I want you in your Knickies outside in Hyde Park. I don't care what your mother says.
Yeah.
I don't care what your friends say. I don't even care if they think you're crazy. But I'm trying to keep you away from the NHS.
Yeah.
And I think you have a small window at high latitudes to do that. And then the flip side is when the weather gets nasty, or say it's raining out, I want you to embrace that cold. That means, I've done this. I mean, Chantel's sitting here listening to this. I can tell you a story when we were in Alaska 2 or 3 summers ago, and it was pouring rain in Alaska in July, and all I had on was shorts and a t-shirt. It was about 37 Fahrenheit. So for you guys, that's like 2, 3, 4 degrees C. Pouring rain, and I'm walking around Juneau, Alaska in weather like that.
Yeah.
So realizing I'm at very, very high latitude, and I'm like, no, I'm not going to do what I did. Last summer, when I was in Norway, we had a day that it got up to 75 Fahrenheit, which is a pretty nice day, beautiful, sunny. Everybody that was around us was wearing coats and jackets. Chantel and I were in a Kaniki in a pool in Norway, getting the sun. So in other words, what I'm trying to say to you, embrace nature. Understand what she brings to you. Am I okay with people using infrared A or near infrared lights? I am, but I think you need to learn how to use it. And this is part of the reason why I refuse to dumb down my information, because I think when you dumb it down, you make it much more likely that these people are subject to bad marketing or they're subject to bad ideas.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I'm a big fan. So I was trained by Wim Hof years ago. He's the guy that does the ice baths and the breathing techniques. And so I've been up mountains in my pants, at -5 and done a lot of ice baths. But the thing that really gets me going, Jack, is a good sauna. I just came from the sauna now before this podcast. But the sauna that I go to is an electric sauna. And so I often worry about, is there an EMF problem in those saunas? I always try and ground afterwards, which we'll talk about in a second. But what are your thoughts on electric saunas? Would you go in them or would you stay away from them?
No, I wouldn't go in them at all.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, since you do live at a high latitude, I would tell you, you specifically, I'd like you to take a trip someday soon, maybe in the summertime, to Bath, England, Bath, UK.
Yep.
And go take a look at the Roman baths.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I want you to build in your house. Like, use stone. Use one of the things that you have a big advantage of, even in the UK, is that you can use geothermal cooling and heating to make your own sauna. And then this is where I think the Scandinavians are really smart, because guess what? They all love sauna. It's a cultural thing, but they do it the right way. They're using, water, heat, fire to do it. And I'm a big fan of that. Why? Because really, what is sauna? What is it doing? It's near infrared therapy. That's what it's doing. And it's giving you a light that's really important. And when you understand that near infrared light is actually a switch, it's actually a photo switch in humans. And I don't want to get too deep into the science because you told me you didn't want to really go there. But that switch is the difference between ATP chemistry and ROS chemistry. And it turns out 1270 nanometer light is that photo switch. And when you understand kind of what we're talking about for high latitude living, yes, to answer your question, I'm a big fan of sauna for people that live in high latitude. But again, it comes back to that red light question you asked me. You got to do it right. So doing sauna electrically is absolutely a modern stupidity.
Interesting. And this is not an infrared sauna. This is just a hot sauna, but it's still an electric hot sauna. So it has a radiator somewhere at the back.
Heat is near infrared light.
Yeah, so it's like a 90-degree Celsius sauna. It just has a big radiator. I know there's another type of sauna I've used before where it's much cooler, but it has literal light. It has light bars in it, and the light is giving you the heat. This one's more like, you might have seen them in Europe where there's normally like a few stones on top of like a heater.
Well,
so it's more of that. But I still think there must be EMF coming off that, surely, because the heat.
Anything that plugs into an AC power grid has EMF.
Sure.
And then you're relying, did the guy in the UK properly ground the circuit? Is there dirty electricity? If you don't go in and test all this, you don't know. It's effectively, if it's done wrong and you don't know about it, just because you don't know about it doesn't mean it doesn't affect you. You could be sitting in Chernobyl. So guess what? Why would I ever take the chance of doing that? And it's the same argument that I make with food with people. When you go out to a restaurant, you have no idea earthly what you're getting. Yeah, it's nice that you don't have to clean the dishes and cook and all that. But if you have no control, isn't that what I said to you before?
Yeah.
You're giving your sovereignty away to a marketer or to a chef, and you don't know if that's a good decision or not. And some people don't give two shits about it. But guess what? These are all the little ways that we make mistakes in our life. And I'm like, if you don't have a mitochondrial disease and you're healthy, I'm okay with you doing that. I'm not trying to tell you I want to take all the joy out of your life. But what I'm saying to you is, if you've got MS, you got hypertension, you got cancer, you can't make these mistakes. Because remember, time is your most valuable asset. And if you keep making mistakes like this, you're subtracting time from your health span, your lifespan, and longevity. And I mean, people will go to the NHS when they have, malignant tumor and beg for 6, 7, 8, 10 weeks more. So, and you don't realize these decisions to go out to dinner or to use an electric sauna or to use a Juve light. That's the same decision except the opposite way. But nobody thinks about it like that. Why? Because they're all dumbed down. They think, oh, Uncle Jack is, trying to just scare the shit out of us. I'm not trying to scare the shit out of you. What I'm trying to do is get you to embrace nature.
Yeah.
I mean, how crazy is that my idea is looked at demonically when every tree in the UK makes the same decision? It lives outside. Wild animals live outside. The only time you see zoo animals is people in cities, people inside houses, and animals in the zoo that we lock in the zoo so we can see them. I think if you really want to see the true essence of a tiger, you don't go to a zoo to see them. You go to Africa and see what tigers do. And I just think that people have forgotten, that we're not divorced from those rules of evolution, those rules of life. Modern humans are zoo animals. And the thing is, these things that we're talking about, the decisions that we make in and around light, that makes us more or less like zoo animals. And I think when you think about an activity that you advocate for, if you think about it with that perspective, you'll be able to answer your question very easily. You're going to say, yeah, that's kind of not how we do it. But, back in Iceland when, the geothermal pools, the real ones, not the fake ones like the Blue Lagoon, they're there for a reason. Those people, those ancient people, have known about this for a long time, that it's a good thing to do. And, I just think it's kind of ironic when the Romans came to the UK, what did they do? They built the Roman baths.
Yep.
So that's why I said to you, the proof that the ancients were smarter than we are is built right in the middle of your country. Go take a look at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And the irony is the people in the UK now won't even let you go in the Roman baths, which to me is absolutely horrible.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's this has been a journey for a decade for me now, going from like very unwoke, very like, you know, sleeping through life and not understanding about how the modern world is working against us. Then I realized that my breathing was really bad. I was mouth breathing and shallow breathing, stressed, and had a shitty corporate job for a long time. So I've been on this journey of trying to unpick my life, and part of that led to grounding as well and earthing. So that's another thing I wanted to pick your brains on. So we have an earthing sheet on our bed, but up until recently, it was plugged into an outlet, and then somebody said, "Don't do that." So could you give me your thoughts on earthing sheets first of all, and all that jazz? Because there's a whole industry now of like earthing mats for your computer and all of this stuff.
Never. Anything that plugs into the power grid is absolutely, you're asking for problems. So if you're going to use an earthing sheet, run a copper wire from the sheet. They have them like that now, through a wire, and put the copper peg in the ground outside your window. That I'd be okay with. I still think that's probably more than you want to handle, but do I think that there's any issues with that? No, I don't think there is. Well, I shouldn't say that. In London, there would be because of jump conduction, but I'd be okay with people doing that, especially if they had a building biologist out to check their sleep situation. But the issue of grounding is very simple. Unfortunately, you told me you didn't want me to get too into science, but you need to know the science of this because it's very interesting, but it's also very easy to understand. When we eat food, what do? We break it down into electrons and protons. So everybody that's centralized believes that it's carbohydrates, fats, and lipids. But interestingly, when you open up a biochemistry book, you'll find out that there's no carbohydrate, lipid transporters that put food into your mitochondria. It's called electron chain transport. So do a hard stop before we talk about grounding. Turns out the story of life is all about electrons, and electrons are how we absorb light. So how does grounding work on Earth? The sun is a cathode ray. The planet is an anode. This is an electromagnetic third-grade experiment. When a cathode ray hits an anode, what happens? Free electrons come off on the surface. So do a hard stop. In other words, grounding is another way to eat without eating food. That's what I'm saying to you. Now, here's the interesting part that a lot of people don't know. Our nearest relatives that have only 400 less genes than us, chimps and gorillas, have no sweat glands on their hands and feet. So I want you to think about that for a minute, but we do. Why is that? That's the reason, humans have socks and no one else does, because our feet sweat. It's because when you have a wet connection, you make a better connection with the tectonic plate. So I want you to do another hard stop. England and Europe used to be a really good place to get really nice shoes that were leather. Can you buy leather-based shoes anymore? No, you can't. Guess what? There's another way that this whole industrial complex is trying to screw us, because then it cuts off your ability to get those free electrons. When you don't have that, you tend to eat more food, especially when the light's bad. See, that's the opposite of the leptin prescription that I wrote. So grounding is a spectacular thing that everybody should do. So when Hyde Park gets sunlight, I would like you in your Kaniki with no shoes on, running around the grass with your new baby and your wife. Why? Because the more you do that in the sun, the less food electrons you need. And that's really important in the summertime. The other big effect, to make the science really easy, sickness, the way I want you to think about it, is a collection of positive charge, okay? Health, wellness, is a collection of negative charge. So we want to have a net negative charge pretty much our whole life. The way in which you do that at your latitude is grounding and getting the sun in the summer months. In the wintertime, you want to embrace cold, because cold water has more electrons in it than warm water. That is the main reason. Going in Southampton in December actually is a benefit. Being part of the polar bear, club in the UK, I'm a big fan of in the wintertime. And do I believe where you live, grounding is best done, in the oceans or the seas that surround the UK? The answer is yes. Now, if you build your pool, kind of like you build your geothermal sauna, then I think that's a wise thing. Like if I was in the UK, I would actually spend more money outside my house than inside my house. And I probably would heat it with, wood and, natural thermal energy. I don't think I would use any of that, if I had enough money, I would probably do the whole project using geothermal, because then you're totally connected, to the earth cycle, and you can go. And, one thing about England and, different parts of Europe that I like, it's beautiful and green outside for a large part of the year, because you guys do get enough rain, and you do get enough light that plants are happy. And plants tend to use red and blue light, because they use chlorophyll. Since we have hemoglobin, we need the purple and red. So it's a different spectrum. And when you realize that just sitting outside underneath your trees in a geothermal pool, or a pool that's grounded that you build, that would be a spectacular way for you to ground. And that way you don't have to worry about the things like you have to worry about in big European cities. Like, for example, one of the things I teach my people in the States is I don't want anybody grounding in a city, because you don't know what's underneath you, like the utilities, the wires, the pipes, because now with new modern ways to communicate, especially 3G to 5G, the way those waves have been engineered by the cell industry, they can jump conduct to conductors that are around you. So that's the reason I told you before, I'm not really a big fan of using even the wire and the copper peg for grounding sheets, because guess what? What happens if you live next to a mast, I don't know, let's say Piccadilly Circus, and there's like 300,000 people around there connecting to watch Netflix or porno sites. The chances of you getting stray conduction through that sheet is way higher. So no, I would actually rather you not do it at that time and realize that that's a risk. And this is part of the reason why in the last 30 years, no matter which country you go in, you find out that longevity is less in big cities. That broke a trend of almost 2,000 years of human data where people had better longevity in cities. It's now changed, because what have we done? We've turned cities into Chernobyls, because of the way we use light. We have it in street lights, we have it on traffic lights, we have it, in all the utilities, under the ground, but also on top of our buildings to allow us to use these horrible devices, that Google and Apple and Microsoft want to sell us. And when you realize there's a risk of that, I do want people to know that I agree with you 100% that grounding is one of the best things we should all do. But I think the way you control this is the same way I told you about sun. I want you to embrace the sun, but I also want you to do your own grounding maneuver in your backyard. Like when you have money, if it came to you going to the Canary Islands or Tenerife or the Med, I would actually say put that off for 2 or 3 years and throw that money, if you're going to stay in the UK, and build yourself an ultimate geothermal pool and a sauna space. And then you'll have a staycation every day, but that staycation will keep you away from the NHS. I'm 100% behind that.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you. That's really, really powerful information. Because I've often worried about the static or the dirty electric that I think people have called it. I live about 120 miles north of London, so we're in quite a nice countryside, but there's a city about 10 miles away. But still, I guess there's a 5G tower about a mile from us, so it's everywhere now.
Well, I'll tell you the metric that I tell my people in the states and here in Central America, that in the United States, big cities, you have to be, because of the airports and the military bases, 75 miles away to mitigate the risk. And here's the other flip side of that. 5G antennas always aren't as bad. The key thing with a 5G antenna is how many obedient idiots are connected to it. Because if, like in a place like Destin, Florida, that has the best beaches in the world, during December, there's hardly anybody there. There's only 20,000 people that live there. But if you go to Destin right now, there's 1 million people in the city because of vacations. So those 5G antennas in the summertime are way worse than they are in the wintertime. Why? Because it's the number of people that connect to that tower to radiate. And when people understand the way light works through the inverse square law is not just the closeness for you to the antenna. Well, how much use is the antenna getting? See, that's the other part of the inverse square law that people forget. So my advice to people is always, when you make a decision where to live, try to live in a place where population density is sparse. And it sounds like you've made that decision. That's good. I don't have a problem with that. But I think when you live in an area where light just is good, you really have to embrace all the other good things that nature brings to you.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on these devices now that you can get? They're called like EMF blockers, and Faraday cages over your bed, and Faraday paint you can put in your bedroom. Where's your head on some of that?
Well, it's kind of interesting. I have a member who is actually based in the UK, who's a building biologist. She actually works in London, and she has to use a lot of that stuff for the people that live like in London, in cities. And I will tell you, depending on how your house tests, I could be a fan of them. But if you ask me about the science of it, remember, when you put a Faraday cage around you, there's a guy named Rutger Weaver who did studies in the 60s on college students, where he put them in a Faraday cage and left them there and let them live there constantly. They all went nuts in 9 to 11 days because you're blocking yourself from the Schumann resonance. But realize the reason why he did the experiment is to see the effect of the Schumann resonance on us. The problem is, if you live in London, what are you really using the Faraday cage for? Is to protect yourself from the cell companies and from modern life. So there's a benefit and a loss, and I would tell you, the chronic use of those things, if you live in a city like London, my opinion is this is the reason I would never live in London. It's also the reason I would never live in New York City, even though that's where I'm from. And it's part of the reason why I live in El Salvador, because I don't have to worry about, what I would call big Western problems here. I'm always in nature, and that's much more important as you age, because remember, your mitochondria age about 10% a year. If you live in a place like London compared to here, you age at a much faster rate, which is the reason why I told you a little while ago that longevity is going down in cities since we've embraced technology. When you actually understand that linkage, then you start to go, yeah, if I'm thinking about using Faraday cage curtains and canopies, maybe I'm living in the wrong place. That's actually the thing I want you to think about. But the only way you're going to come up with that idea is if you hired somebody like Sarah Hoskin in the UK, and she came out and assessed your house and she said, look, this is a shithole. Then you have two choices. Okay, you're going to continue in your shithole? Then I think those things have some usefulness for you. But realize what you're doing is you're making a trade-off, okay? And I want people to always know what the trade-off is. I think when you're trading time for money, you're always going to lose. And I just believe when you understand that time's our most valuable asset and you need to start treating it as such, these decisions to pick up, and move and go to a better location, even if it pisses off mommy, grandma, and grandpa, so be it. And if you really think about it, the decentralized mindset would say, yeah, we're going to move to Clacton-on-the-Sea and we're going to draw a family down there because that's the best place for us to be in the UK. And I think there's some benefit to that. To me, it makes way more sense to draw your family out of Chernobyl to your place, because when they come to your place and they're sitting in your geothermal pool doing sauna with you, they're going to say to you, God, I feel so much better here. And you're going to go, guess what? Now you know why we're here. So I think this is why I tell people it's no longer about being survival of the fittest. It's actually being survival of the wisest, because some of these things that I'm bringing to you, because you don't think about these things until you really understand the science. And that's the reason why fundamentally I will always refuse to dumb down my information, because I think once you really understand it, then you go, oh, no. Uncle Jack, tell me some more. Tell me some more. Like, tell me the areas that I'm making mistakes, that I'm completely blinded to it. Generally, when it comes to EMF, I just hand them Dr. Andrew Marino's book, Going Somewhere, and they read that and they put it down, and all they look like is either the O sign. The O sign is when their mouth is like this, or the Q sign is when they're like, and they're almost dead. But that book fundamentally gets to the issue of why you need to pay attention to those things no matter where you live. Because I think it's important whether you're at the equator or you're at the 63rd latitude. And I think the more we embrace nature, the better off we are as a species.
Yeah, that makes sense. So Jack, you're in my position. I'm in the middle of England right now. Where should I go? If I could go and live in a few different places, because my key priorities are my health, my wife's health, my son's health. Where should I go? Should I get out of the UK? Should it be Spain? You know, where's some good places to?
Let me just put it this way: if you have no mitochondrial diseases and you say imbibe some of the information that I've given you already in this podcast, like say you go out and build a pool in your backyard and you don't cover it in the winter, and you put the real sauna in there and you use geothermal, I think you can live that in that area. I mean, I did a podcast, and I don't like, your podcast telling another guy, but you need to listen to it. A kid from the UK, a very young guy named Owen Sheesby. I did a podcast with him, and all we did was, it was a high latitude podcast. We didn't talk about anything related to how Uncle Jack wants to pull you to the tropics. But I lay the case out that you can make it. Some of the longest, healthiest, briskest people on this planet live at high latitudes. Those are the Vikings. The people of Iceland, even to this very day, have really good longevity, and they're pretty healthy. The difference is you have to realize they're in the middle of a cold environment. They live on volcanoes. That brings in another part of, the three-legged stool that we haven't even talked about. The UK used to be volcanic. It no longer is, and you have to realize that it does have beautiful, lush greenery everywhere. So I tell you, I think you can make it, but I think you have to realize that you probably have to put yourself on a tech diet to stay there long term. And as you get older, you need more sun, not less. So for me, the UK, once you hit your 50th birthday, I'd be out. And the one thing that I think all my friends in the UK, all of them have vacation homes somewhere else. Whether it be Spain or somewhere else, because they implicitly know this is the instinct of mammals saying, I got to get out of this place. I mean, I just feel better when I go to Malta, or I feel better when I go to Mallorca, and they have a place they go for 3-4 months out of the year. So I would tell you the decision-making process for you specifically isn't about you and your wife. When you decide to have sex and have a baby, it becomes the baby. So then you have to decide if you want to be a good father. Do you want your kid to start off life the first 6 to 10 years in a shitty way so they wind up like the guy in the airport in the Netherlands with MS? See, that's the decision you have to make. Now, I can tell you what I would do. There is no chance, if I was a young man, that I would bring my family up in New York City or London or any latitude probably higher than my mitochondrial haplotype would provide for. Just so you're clear and your audience is clear, I'm more of a Brit than you are. I come from the 59th latitude, okay? That's where my people come from. And I have a very uncoupled haplotype. So that means I could really do well at a high latitude. But remember, I'm also entering my 7th decade in terms of heteroplasmy. So what does the science of mitochondria tell Uncle Jack? Because I understand it. I need more sun and less temperature variation. So that is the reason why my whole life as a doctor, I've moved from New York to New Orleans, to Nashville, to Mississippi, to New Orleans, and now I'm in El Salvador. So what is the trend of that story in Jack's, 60 some odd years? It's a trend that I'm migrating south. Why? Because I'm trying to protect the most important set of mitochondria in me, which is here and in my heart. So I've made that decision. Now, my children are older. They know all this stuff that I'm teaching you. But remember, I was able to be authoritarian like a monarch while I was paying their bills. As soon as they become adults, they get to do what they want to do. But both of them understand the problem they have. And I would tell you, I think the problem people have mostly with making the right decisions for their health almost always comes down to anchors in their life. Those anchors tends to be jobs and families. And I think I do a pretty good job with my own members telling them that even your family could be the worst anchor in your life. And you have to view it as such, as a decentralized thinker, and realize it. And what I tried to tell you earlier, and I was trying to be a little bit provocative with you, grandma and grandpa who want to see that new baby, you have the perfect opportunity to drag them to a better place, to see your child. You should actually use the child as bait. That's what I'm telling you. Think of your parents as great white sharks, and that baby's a baby seal, and you bring that baby where they need to come. And then hopefully when they come to see the baby enough and they realize that this is the joy of their life and they really want to do more of this, you can say at the dinner table, Why don't you guys get a place down here and come stay here more than not? In other words, you are creating the life you want because you're sculpting their life by using light to do it. And to me, that's a brilliant decision. And you don't have to have the discussion with them, that you're trying to force them to do something they don't want to do. And this is the reverse of what the government does with us with technology. The government doesn't have a discussion with us. I mean, if you don't believe me, I told people the story in many podcasts about Steve Jobs. If you read his autobiography with Walter Isaacson, he tells people, I would never let my kids use the technology that I brought to the world. But the best part of the story, and it resonates with what I'm telling you now, when he came out with Apple iPad 2, kids were being bought the iPad by grandparents and everything else because of a digital babysitting. Do you know that Apple put an infrared detector on the device and never marketed it? Do you know why? Because if they would have marketed it to you and you would have known about it, you would have said, why do we need that? Why is this a benefit? What was Steve Jobs telling you? I know my technology is bad, so I'm going to put something in it to protect children. So if that iPad ever touches them, it turns off, stops the RF and the microwaves. If that doesn't tell you it's a smoking gun, I don't think anything else will. But you know what the problem is? People don't highlight this story. And when I tell people this story, they think I'm anti-tech. I'm not. I want you to use tech wisely. I mean, think about what you and I are doing now. We're communicating over the ocean, probably 8,000 miles away. We're able to do that through technology. I think that's ultimately a good thing. But the difference is how I'm using this tech. I'm outside. I'm in the sun. This is AM sun for me. This is beautiful. I just want people to get that message that there's a smart way to use tech and then there's a not smart way to use it. And I want you to be more smart and less dumb because the collateral effects ultimately are going to steal your time from you.
Yeah. And I'm looking at you with that beautiful background, and I'm in here and I've got the artificial light behind me and the artificial light here, and so you're making me question everything, so thank you for that. I needed to have this conversation today on many levels. Quick sidetrack, my dad had eye cancer and he had his eye removed, and the NHS told him, the sun's done this to you, stop being outside. So he now wears glasses a lot to protect from the daylight in the other eye. I'm guessing you've got a different, I mean, I know you don't know his case history, he's Irish, but it seems crazy to me based on everything you're saying that the sun would have done that to him. Any thoughts?
Yeah, but you can prove the NHS is idiots right away. You know what you do? Go back and get his medical chart or get his permission and go look and see what his vitamin D was before he had the cancer. Because if the NHS is right, this is the simplest way to prove them as idiots. His vitamin D should be toxic, right? If the sun caused it, you know what you're going to find? His vitamin D was non-existent. That's why he got the cancer. It's actually the opposite. And you have to realize, this is what I want you to understand. When I say this is going to blow your mind. Why does Bill Gates, dermatologists, and ophthalmologists all have the same opinion that the sun is bad? Because it's good for their profits. There's the answer. Remember what's axiomatic through all the world. Incentives dictate outcomes. That is the reason why ophthalmologists, dermatologists, and Bill Gates all want to block the sun. Because it's a very profitable message to get out. Your dad has completely fallen in line. Do you remember when we were talking about the stuff you said, let's not talk about it? This is why you need to talk about it. Because guess what? Compliance with a centralized system leads to problems. You don't realize how it happens. So many people don't realize the collateral effects of the things that's happening. Like I just told the two Viking guys from Netherlands that did a podcast with me when I was in Prague. And I said, do you realize why the government is coming after land in Europe right now? Coming after the farmers. They want to control your food. That's already happened in the United States. That's why our food is worse than people in Europe. But the real reason is they want land confiscation. I said, that's already happened in the United States. All you have to do is fly over the Midwest and you see farms that are as big as the UK. The huge squares. When you fly over Czech Republic or UK, you see all these little baby farms everywhere. The government doesn't want that because they know when they control food and land, then they also control you. And then the next step, which they're already preconditioning you guys for, is actually the CBDC. That's where the digital IDs all come in. It's all about gaining control of the money. Once they have control of the money, they got everything. And what you need to do to fight back on this, to always keep your decentralized mind, is build your sauna, build your good pool, embrace the sun, try to take some of your money. I tell you, put it in Bitcoin. But if you don't even do that, if you don't think that's a wise choice, then go buy yourself a place where the sun is good so that you'll be able to get out. Unfortunately, my concern for European people is pretty soon they're going to limit your ability to go to different countries. Why? I mean, you're already starting to see that. The only way they let you go is if you're a legal immigrant. Then they'll let you go wherever you want. But, you know, when you're a citizen of the UK and say you decide, I would like to go to, I don't know, Cannes or Siena or Mallorca or Barcelona, the way the world is headed, you may not be able to do that. And then I ask you the question, okay, you just wasted 30% of your net income buying something that you can't get to. Was that smart or not? Isn't that a sovereignty problem? You know, and if you took that 30% and put it in Bitcoin, they can't touch it. So that when you're ready, you and your wife and your baby are ready to make a maneuver to buy a place in a different place, then you have freedom to do that. And all the time that you're waiting for this to happen, the Bitcoin goes up, 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 up. You know, the difference between Bitcoin and our money, you know, and your money in the UK is, remember, that money is programmed to deflate, meaning it's inflation. I always tell people inflation is taxation without representation. It goes back to the American Revolution. And we still have it. Why? Because we took the Bank of England's idea through Alexander Hamilton. You go back and look at our history, you know, the Federalist Papers. This is why Thomas Jefferson and Hamilton fought so vehemently, because Jefferson hated the banks. I can tell you, I understand Thomas Jefferson probably better today than I did when I was 20 years old. Why? Because I hate them. And I want people to understand that my hatred of the banks, the reason why it's big, is because I know the more I hate the banks, the better my health gets. I have to do everything opposite what the banks are trying to do. Because remember, they're trying to take my monetary freedom, so I can't have a podcast with you to talk to your guys in the UK so you can see what the 13th latitude looks like behind me. You know, and from my perspective, nothing makes me happier than when one of my friends comes from a high latitude and comes visit me. I mean, it happened yesterday. One of my good friends who works for a company called Zorp, who is involved in zero knowledge proofs, is going to help me change, you know, centralized medicine here. He came from, you know, high latitude North America. He's originally from Canada. And he's down here now to sample El Salvador to see, hey, could this be a place for me to get out? And I kind of think that's good, because I think you need to have that type of freedom to do that. And my concern is the people of the UK and the people of Europe are rapidly losing that ability through all the things that are happening over the last, I'm going to be honest with you, I think it's the last 50 years, maybe even longer. The trajectory of you guys and us is the same. We're going to be the last ship to sink because we're the global reserve currency. But I want you guys to know that you do have an opportunity. If you're able to think well, and I would say critical thinking is a function of how much time you spend in decentralized nature. If I can get you outside, you're going to look at me less crazy and realize there's a lot of wisdom in what I'm telling you. And ultimately, that's all I care about. I always tell people when I do a podcast, I'm speaking to one or two people in the audience. I don't care about everybody else. And, you know, a lot of people get offended when I say that. I'm like, well, I don't care if you're offended. And I'm going to tell you the reason why. That's what nature tells us. We've had 5 extinction events on this planet, okay? But the interesting thing, when she wipes stuff out, she always leaves the seed of creation behind. And it turns out that seed is where everything comes back. Life is really hard to extinguish. And I think the same thing is true of thinking. I think right now we have bad thinking in the WHO, the WEF, your king, the Pope, the United States government. All these guys are all the same problem. But here's the cool thing. Me and you and all the people of Europe, all the people of the United States, we have a choice to make. We can disconnect from the system they're building, and we can reconnect to nature. And when we reconnect to nature, we can sit down and have a discussion over a podcast talk about things that are tied to this decentralized network, how our mitochondria really work. And then when you begin to see how these things really all connect, you go, this isn't crazy. It's actually crazy how we used to live our life, how we were conditioned to live our life, and we need to reject that. And when you have a little baby like you do, I don't have any little babies anymore. I look at you guys as my little babies now. That's the reason I spend time talking to you. But I think that wisdom needs to be placed in your child. To me, that's the most important part about being a parent these days. Realize that the state is trying to take away your sovereignty over your child. You need to protect that until that little brain is old enough to start doing its own things. And then you need to cut the umbilical cord and let them go out and figure it out for themselves. Hopefully, you've uploaded enough good stuff about nature in them, you know, where they're not going to immediately run to London or New York and go work for an investment bank.
Yeah. Yeah, we're thinking of homeschooling and everything at the minute. So we're all in that mindset.
I think that's a great idea.
We've only got 10 minutes, and I want to pick your brain on the last couple of bits. Vitamin D. Would you suggest somebody like me who's in the Latitude? I mean, should I be taking that supplement? You're saying no. Why no?
Well, the simple answer is I would tell you, and you probably need to do this. I don't know if you have show notes, but I have 2 unbelievable tweets yesterday from another podcast I did. Vitamin D, when you take it, doesn't equal vitamin D from the sunlight. Part of the reason why, if you want to know the main reason, when you take vitamin D pills, it's soaked in seed oils. The reason it's soaked in seed oils is because it's a fat-soluble vitamin. But when you understand how we use it, it's made from an ester of cholesterol in our skin from UVB sunlight. It stays electromagnetically on that ester until it falls, just like an apple to a tree, but in the blood to vitamin D binding protein. And then what happens? What makes the decision that it falls into the blood to go to where it needs to be transmitted to the kidney and liver? Turns out sulfation. You know what sulfation does in sunlight? It actually makes it water soluble. So hard stop. I just told you, Big Pharma, GlaxoSmithKline will sell you vitamin D that's in seed oil. So what's the effect when you take vitamin D pills? Raises your cholesterol. Then it also uncouples the system, because remember, how you decide to make vitamin D is from 315 to 325 light. Well, if you never get that light, which you don't in the UK, very rarely, that's why you can see everybody's got low vitamin D status, which is why, from a longevity standpoint, I don't want my little 18-year-old baby living in the UK long term. Now you understand the reason why. But the NHS doctors, they'll try like crazy never to order vitamin D on you because they don't want you to know what your vitamin D is. Because remember I told you, vitamin D is a proxy for the sun. So anybody who advocates blocking the sun, they don't want you to have your vitamin D checked. Because the lower it is, the more drugs they get to sell you, the more surgeries they get to do, the more ways they get to control your life. But vitamin D will raise your LDL cholesterol. It'll lower your HDL cholesterol. And then what will the doctor do when he sees that? Oh, I got to put you on statins. So do you understand? They have already gamed the system. This is just like the casino when you're sitting in there and they see that you put $100,000 down. You're in a blacked out room with one armband, it's all around you, and then a girl comes with her breasts hanging out, handing you a glass of, scotch. That's exactly what I just told you. You do not want to use pills to do this. Now, unfortunately, many of you there, the best thing about vitamin D pills, it'll help prevent rickets, it'll help the bone issues, but this will probably shock you even further. And I tell you this in the UK because you're now having a lot of immigration in people with dark skin. Do you know that vitamin D pills actually affect darker skinned people worse than white skinned people? It's true. Those studies have been done in the United States, but they're not well popularized. And what happens, people who take vitamin D pills who have darker skin, whether you're brown or black, the intima of your arteries get thicker. Why? Because it downregulates nitric oxide production when you have dark skin. Because remember, dark skin is designed to protect you from equatorial sun. There is no place in the UK, even in a tanning bed, where there's equatorial sun. So this is the reason why people who are African American or African, when they come to high latitude Europe, they develop mitochondrial diseases, peripheral artery disease, hypertension. They also get more mental illness. Why? because they act like wahoos, because what makes melatonin and dopamine? UV light. Those are the two aromatic amino acids. So when you actually turn the telly on and you see what the hell's going on in Europe, this is the story. It comes from this story. It's a light story. And people are stunned when I make the links for them. But no, if you're a white dude like me, if I lived up there, no, I would not do it. In fact, my mitigation strategy, if I had low vitamin D and I had, say, a shitty job, I would go probably buy a UVA and a UVB bulb from the pet store, that you use for reptiles. And then I'd probably add in some infrared A and near infrared light, or like I told you, the best way for you to do it is if you build that sauna the right way, I'd get in that sauna and then I'd put combination of lights over my sauna, and that's how I would raise my vitamin D if I lived where you live.
Okay, thank you. So my baby, he's half Polish, half Irish-ish.
Well, that's the same latitude.
Yeah.
I mean, think about it.
So
Ireland and Poland are
very similar.
I think top of Poland is 59 latitude.
Okay.
If I'm not mistaken.
Okay, I'm not sure.
And top of Ireland is also 59 latitude because it's close to Edinburgh.
So when we go on vacation, let's say we go to Thailand this year, how do I protect him from getting burned? Because from my understanding, and please correct me if I'm wrong, suntan oils seem to be the devil. And suntan, so is it just, how do you protect a young, fair-skinned child if you go to where you live or to Thailand? What are your tips or thoughts on that?
Well, that's where you have to learn how to build the solar callus. I've got a Patreon blog how to do that, but for your child, the answer is pretty easy. Those red lights that you got. People are shocked when they hear this. When you use infrared A light, that's light from 600 to 1,000 nanometer. That's not the near infrared stuff now. It preconditions your skin for UV light. So guess what? You won't get burned. People don't realize in mammals, this is the reason why I'm from the 59th latitude and I can stay out in the sun literally 12 hours a day here. I don't burn like I used to burn when I was a kid. And the problem is when you're wearing clothes, sunglasses, contacts, putting sunscreen on, what are you doing? You're decreasing melanin in your integument and in your eye. Melanin is actually your natural sunscreen. So even when you're a white boy with blue eyes, the reason you're a white boy with blue eyes is because you live at a high latitude, the sun sucks. So what's nature doing? It's sucking all of your melanin out of you by design. And then what are you idiots doing now? You're listening to the dermatologist tell you to do more. That's the reason why you burn, because you have no protection. So building the solar callus gives you that protection. And one of the ways you can do that is the thing I just told you about how to use the pool and use, a reptile light. But I think in a child, just getting them in front of infrared A light, 20 minutes, 3 or 4 times a day before you go, I would do that probably 4 to 6 weeks. I have a picture actually in my solar callus blog that actually shows you what skin looks like when it's preconditioned by red, and then UV comes in and you'll see they don't get sunburns.
Wonderful.
I will just tell you, sunburn, when you get it, it's not as bad as the dermatologist tells you. I'm going to tell you the literature even backs that up. They just bury that truth. But I'm going to tell you, a sunburn means that you're not doing a good job with your solar callus. So I always try to tell people, using common sense, look at the trees behind me in this video. Do those trees have any clothes or any sunscreen on them?
No.
You know any wild animals in Africa that come out of their mother's vagina that have clothes, sunglasses, contacts?
No.
Do they sell sunscreen at, the local watering hole where the crocodiles are? No.
No.
We're the only stupid idiot animals on the planet that have bought the BS from the ophthalmologist, dermatologist, and Bill Gates that blocking the sun is smart. Turns out you don't ever want to block the sun.
Yeah.
Ever. Okay? And that's how you build your solar callus. The big protection for you is to upregulate melanin production in your integument and your eye. The way you do that is stop wearing sunglasses. Dr. Alexis Cowan is a PhD I've done a couple podcasts with. She's got a really cool Instagram picture. She says, before I die, she goes, I think it will be shown that most skin cancers are caused by wearing sunglasses.
Wow.
I think she's absolutely correct.
Wow.
I don't think there's any doubt about that. And I'll tell you a story. When I was in London and Prague the last time, I couldn't believe how many people were wearing sunglasses. I'm going, let me think about this. You guys have no sun and you're wearing sunglasses. If you don't tell me that marketing's not legalized lying, then that's proof positive that it is. Because you have idiots in London girls with blonde hair, blue eyes, walking around wearing sunglasses when the sun is out in central London. That is nuts.
Yeah.
Pure insanity. And then, when women realize that, Maybelline and L'Oreal put sun blockers in their makeup and this and that, no, I don't want you wearing that crap either.
Yeah.
You have no basis of wearing that stuff if you live at a high latitude. Women need to understand that. They need their skin in the game. So I would tell you, with the baby, shellfish, seafood, the broths, that has all the phytochemicals in it that also help with the red light. Upregulate. Start making seafood broths. I mean, the thing about the UK is you guys have pretty decent seafood, and you can get it because your neighbors, like in Norway and Sweden, have really good seafood around them. You guys have overfished your seas, but they haven't overfished theirs. So you can get the stuff there. Just cook all this stuff down. Use it as a base in your sauces.
Mm-hmm.
Let the baby eat that stuff. Get it in the red light. I guarantee you, when you go to Thailand, you're going to be like, my little white baby is not getting burned. And you're going to be stunned.
Okay.
You're going to be like, wow.
Yeah. Incredible.
If I can do it, your baby can do it.
Yes.
That I can tell.
Okay. Thank you, Jack. The last question I've got for you, that was excellent, by the way. Do you know anything about the connection between earthing and grounding and respiration? And in particular, I've heard some things around our oxygen uptake is better when we're grounded. So we're a breathing channel. I've had Clint Ober on. He did like an earthing documentary a few years ago, and he touched on this a little bit. But do you know anything about like HRV and grounding and respiration and grounding?
Yeah, this one's easy. And I guess we'll self-correct some of the things that you had put in your head that are wrong about breathing, especially around the Wim Hof method, because it's incorrect. It doesn't work with the Bohr and Haldane effect, but it's tied to this issue. We're going to start it simple for the non-scientist. I want you to go, when this podcast is over, and take a look at your coffee maker. If your coffee maker has only 2 prongs and not that third prong, that coffee maker is not going to be as efficient. When you go buy a new coffee maker that has 3 prongs and it's grounded, it actually works better. So it means that the thermal efficiency from the AC power grid is better when you do that. So if you remember the story that I told you in grounding early in this podcast, when you have your feet on the ground and you're outside, you make a better connection with Earth. You absorb more electrons into your body. What do electrons do from that funny guy that won the Nobel Prize in 1922? The photoelectric effect. What does it say? Light is captured by electrons. So that means when you're outside, you capture more light. When you capture more light, what do you do with that light? You turn it into a DC electric current. See, that's the reason the AC power grid is bad for you. The higher the DC current is in you, actual better alveolar O2 you can get in, and breathing is more efficient. So respiratory rates drop. Here's the other funny thing. Even when you live at a high latitude England, the sun sucks. But when you're grounded outside, do you know that your venous O2 will go up higher? Remember, venous O2 is before you get to the heart and lungs. So if you have more oxygen in deoxygenated blood, do you think that would make you a better or worse breather?
So
better.
Better, yeah.
Right. So guess what? The effect of grounding, the effect of sunlight, is actually to increase venous O2. So anytime you're able to keep more oxygen in the system, mitochondria don't have to work as hard, because what's the terminal electron acceptor in mitochondria? Oxygen. So breathing is fundamentally an electromagnetic process. The problem is you have to know about how the electromagnetic process works. So I'll give you, for example, again, let's talk about COVID, because in England, you guys were really about this. Remember that most of the people that died didn't have good breathing, because the virus itself, this is pre-jab now, the virus itself made the intima and everything in the lungs thicken with fluid. That's the reason why, is because they had low vitamin D levels. They didn't have a high enough DC current. So those were the people that actually did the worst. The people that had the lowest vitamin D levels actually had the worst outcomes. Now I want you to think about what the NHS did. When Dr. Fauci told the whole world, go inside and social distance, that was absolutely the wrong decision. What did everybody else, like in Sweden, do? Sweden's even worse than you guys. They're at 63 latitude. They went outside. Okay, and they had the best results. So again, what did I tell you in the beginning of this podcast? Do the best. So it turns out when you have a respiratory virus or any kind of respiratory issue and you want to improve breathing efficiency, you want to go outside. One of the best places for you to be outside in the UK is sitting under a tree. I would tell you that's one of the fastest ways, even on a sunny day where there is UV, because what happens is the chlorophyll absorbs the UV light, absorbs all the other frequencies of light, and then the biophotons from the tree come down to you, and it will actually stimulate your breathing. Also, remember the other effect. What is the end product, the end gas of photosynthesis? Oxygen. That's the main reason when you want to go in nature. So I've told people, if you have a blood cancer, that means like multiple myeloma, leukemia, lymphoma, anything like that at all, instead of opting for GlaxoSmithKline's thing, I would like you to go someplace where there's a forest and sit under the tree constantly. You can still go get your chemotherapy, but that chemotherapy will help you way better than the stuff you're buying from Big Pharma. The problem is the oncologist won't tell you that because he's making money giving you the centralized prescription. Nobody makes money from what I just told you right there, but you know who will? You will, the patient who's sick. You have to realize that nature has a seed of creation in it. Didn't I tell you that before about extinction events? The problem is, do you know what that seed is? Maybe Uncle Jack just told you something you didn't know.
Yeah.
Breathing is an electromagnetic process, completely, totally tied to light and cold. And when you actually look at the physiology, okay, the physiology has to maximize the Bohr-Haldane effect. I never talk bad about Wim Hof because I think he's a good guy and he gets people outside, but his breathing technique is absolutely wrong, okay? But why is he still successful? Because he's getting people in the cold outside, which is absolutely the right thing to do. And when you do absolutely the right thing, even when you're told the wrong thing, guess what happens? You still get better, which is why Uncle Jack doesn't talk shit about Wim. Because guess what he does? He puts his fingers in your nostrils and gets you to go outside and embrace the cold. And Uncle Jack is cool with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic. Jack, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for giving us your time. And like I said, for those one or two people you were speaking to, I'm sure it's more than one or two, they're going to get a lot of value from this. Are there any final words of wisdom you'd like to leave us with?
Yeah, I think the one thing I'd like all of you to do, the best health advice, decentralized health advice that I give to people in El Salvador and to the president here in El Salvador, who I've wrote a constitutional amendment for medical freedoms, is never miss a sunrise the rest of your life. If you do that, you make that decision, that is the single best health decision that you could ever make.
So staring at the sunrise, watching the sun come up?
You just have to be outside when the sun rises, because what that does, kicks on your circadian clock mechanism. In other words, brain becomes much more accurate in sensing light and dark. That's the first step to avoiding the NHS. It's the first step to avoid bad thinking.
And so would it be better, so the sunrise is more powerful than just getting out? Because Huberman talks a lot about as soon as you wake up, first thing you need to do is get outside, get daylight on your eyes. But I didn't know there was power in actually the sunrise, because here in the UK it's very cloudy sometimes in the morning. Would it still be
still getting it through the clouds?
Okay.
You're still getting the, remember, your eye is the clock in your eye is called the supracosmatic nucleus. It's an optical lattice clock. It works by light. So it senses the color temperature right away. So it knows from dark to light what happens, and that starts the whole process of all the circadian clock genes in you, and that controls all the biochemistry from that level below.
Yeah.
In other words, if you don't get that message, you've created absolute chaos in the biochemical pathways below.
Makes sense.
And you will never get better.
Jack, it's been an absolute pleasure. We're going to link everybody down below to your website, your Instagram, all your links. And thank you so much for your time. Honestly, it's been a real pleasure. And I'm going to get outside.
Problem.
All right. Thank you so much. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Take care.
Cheers. Take care. Bye, Jack. Thank you so much for sticking all the way through to the end of that podcast. You are truly a Breath fan, and I appreciate you, and I wanted to say a huge thank you. I would like you to consider one thing that you took away from this podcast. And the best thing you can do is make a note on the comments or in a tweet or something like that, because we want to commit to the learning and avoid podcasts just being like Netflix, where we just binge loads of stuff and nothing really changes. So what's one thing that you can take away and put in the comments so other people can also learn and, you know, get information and get inspired by your learnings as well. So consider doing that, because it's really powerful to do so. We're going to do a breathing exercise in a second, but before we do, I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about if you want to consider working on the breathing. We've got loads of ways to do that. We've got one-on-one coaching, we've got a private community, we've got video courses, and so there's a few links down below. If you feel like this is your time to make a change, you know that the breath is powerful, but you're not quite sure what to do or how to do it, and you're looking for that support. I've been in this game now for nearly a decade. I've studied, I've researched 100 plus breathing experts, and I work one-on-one with clients. I have a community of people that are in there as well. So consider clicking on some of the links and let's have a conversation. Maybe we can do some one-on-one coaching. I offer some packages there. If you're a good fit, we can talk about that, or we can do a video course. Either way, in short, you can go a lot deeper on your breath than just a YouTube video or a podcast, because what we've got to do with breathing, we've got to feel it. We've got to find the right breathing exercises for our body. And we also need the accountability and the consistency, because doing anything once isn't going to make a change. One set of press ups, one set of squats, we're not going to turn into the Terminator, unfortunately. But when we have the consistency and the practice and the clarity and the support, then that's when the magic happens. So a few links down below. If you are on the fence about working with us, then just come and have a Zoom conversation. Let's see if it's for you or not, and we can take it from there. All right, let us get ready now for our breathing exercise. So just feel free to close the eyes and give the shoulders a little roll. Just start to notice the breath. Start to soften the breath. And we'll begin the breathing exercise in a few seconds. Thank you so much for being here. Welcome to Take a Deep Breath. Today's breathing exercise is probably the most important breathing exercise out there. It's called breath awareness. We're going to just notice our breath, and without judgment and without changing it, we're just going to start to pay attention. Because once we know how our breathing is, then we can start to make changes with breathing exercises. So sit back and relax. Have a little stretch. Wiggle those shoulders. Have a little shuffle. Get yourself nice and comfy. Closing the eyes. Give the jaw a little wiggle. And we'll just start to notice the breath. Just start to pay attention. We don't judge. We don't make wrong. We don't need to amend anything, just noticing the breath. Let's just trace the next breath in through the nose, and then just following that air all the way down into the lungs, and then following the exhale back out again. And just asking yourself this question: how does it feel to be breathing into my body right now? Tracing the next breath in through the nose, deep down into the lungs, following it back out again. How does your pace feel? How does the breath feel in terms of the quickness or slowness? Does it feel like it's a little fast, a little slow, somewhere in between? Again, there's no right or wrong here. We're just trying to notice the pace of our breath. Just do that for the next couple of breaths. And now let's notice the depth of our breath. On the next inhale, just notice which part of your body fills up. Is it more chest, more belly? Maybe it's back. Maybe you can't tell where it is, or maybe it's all of those areas. So again, just taking some time, breathing in, and just noticing where the breath wants to go. And forget anything that you've heard about good breathing and bad breathing. And don't try and force the breath into a certain area. Just allow the natural rhythm and the natural inhalation to happen, and allow the body to breathe into that area, and just be curious where that breath is going. It might even be changing moment by moment, breath by breath, and that's okay. And let's just notice the nose. So just the nose is so sensitive, and so what you might be able to detect is on the next inhale that the air feels a little bit cooler than the exhale. So when you breathe in next time, just pay attention to the temperature of the air through the nose, and then as you breathe back out again, also paying attention. And the nose might even notice that the air is a little bit warmer as you breathe out. Now, what might have happened since we've started this awareness exercise is that the breaths already become a little softer and a little slower just by paying attention to it. How wonderful is that? So just keep noticing the next few inhales and exhales. And if your mind starts to wander, that's okay, but the minute that you've noticed it, just bringing it back to the breath. Even try what happens if you put a little smile on your face. What does that do to the breath? How does it change the feeling of it? Now just noticing your tummy, and just noticing if it feels soft or tight or clenched. So just relaxing and noticing. Noticing the jaw. Is the jaw tight and clenched or open? And you can soften the belly and you can soften the jaw. And just for the last couple of breaths now, just noticing the inhale and exhale. Noticing how the body feels. Giving ourselves a little break from the busy mind as we pay attention to our body. Just a few minutes of breath awareness every day can truly change your life. Just noticing how we feel. Breathing in and breathing back out. Just taking your time to fill up and empty. And that's it, you're done. So just wiggling fingers and toes and just being really patient and coming back now. And know that you've got this breath awareness at any time you need it. And it's good just to check in with yourself once a day, just to notice how things are, because tomorrow might be a completely different breath awareness to today. So just using the power of this exercise, a little bit like a sat-nav, you need to know where you are before you can put the directions in where you want to go. Now that you've done this, if you'd like to deepen your practice, then scroll down below this video and there's a couple of links. There's a few breathing exercises. You can also book in a one-to-one coaching session, and there are a couple of courses you might want to consider. So just have a look below and find something that's suitable for you. And I look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you so much for breathing with me. Have a wonderful rest of your day.